Cops realize killer is the one they least expected. The chilling case of Natalie Bollinger, the knock at the door. Subscribe if you dare, like if you're watching in the dark, and drop a comment when your pulse slows, because this one turns on a single knock. The call came in just after 3 on a winter afternoon in Broomfield, Colorado. A 19-year-old named Natalie hadn't answered her boyfriend's texts. The last message she'd sent said someone was at the door. Then, silence. Within minutes, patrol units rolled to the small apartment she shared with Joey, the boyfriend who had phoned in the report. A TV glowed in the living room. A mug of coffee stood cooling on the counter. A phone lay abandoned on the couch with a half-typed reply frozen on the screen, as if the room itself had held its breath and never let it out. Detectives began their loop. Neighbors, cameras, phone pings. Natalie's sister answered on the first ring. "No, she hasn't called," she said, the worry already baked into her voice. "I'm heading out to look." The family's concern wasn't just instinct. Natalie had filed a protection order 6 days earlier against a man named Sean, whose fixation had turned from awkward to alarming. His name slid to the top of the board before the whiteboard marker left its cap. By evening, detectives were sitting across from Sean in a windowless room. He folded into the metal chair like he wanted to disappear inside it. He talked in circles. He'd been home. He was afraid of people. He wished the police didn't have to waste time on him. Concern bled into his sentences, but so did something else. Hours he couldn't account for, comments that felt rehearsed, a plastic concern that didn't quite bend to the shape of real worry. While one team kept him talking, another traced his purchases, his routes, his posts. The picture wasn't clean, but it also wasn't proof, the night saw. Stretched thin. Tips rattled in. Unmarked vehicles near Riverdale Road. A white pickup idling too long at a light. Someone swore they heard a sharp sound out by the farms. Officers combed fields and ditches while breath turned to steam in the cold. Searchlights pushed across winter-stiff grass. Somewhere between the slow sweep of a beam and the next call over the radio, the tone of the case changed. A separate county dispatcher transferred a report. A person found off Riverdale Road near a private property line. Units converged. Yellow tape stitched the dark to the earth. The scene told one thing clearly. Natalie wasn't missing anymore. What had begun as a frantic search clicked into the solemn mechanics of a homicide investigation. The question that had floated above the case, who was at the door, hardened into something heavier. Who pulled the trigger, and why? Sean stayed in the frame. His history with Natalie, the recent order, the videos he'd posted, it all read like smoke from a fire. Yet when investigators pressed the timeline, pieces refused to lock. Cell records suggested he was elsewhere at key windows. Digital footprints didn't match the drive to Riverdale. The stalker remained disturbing, but the math wouldn't bend to place him at the scene. Detectives widened the circle. A car shooting in a neighboring jurisdiction bubbled up. Different victim, different crew, but a witness kept describing a young woman leaning out to look back, worried and brave. Natalie's face slid into the comparisons almost perfectly. Almost. When the girl from that car turned up alive, the lead dissolved in the fluorescence of an interview room. It wasn't Natalie. The case sagged back into the weight of not knowing. Joey, the boyfriend, kept cooperating. He offered access to cameras at his workplace. The footage showed him where he said he was. His phone backed it up. Grief hung on him. Like a soaked coat. Detectives didn't rule anything out. Partners are always considered, but they stopped trying to shove him into a shape that didn't fit, which left the team with a house where the TV still glowed, a door someone had knocked on, and a crime scene miles away. They reset. Evidence bags stacked. Timelines refreshed. If the answer wasn't in the obvious suspects, it would live in the data. On January 17th, analysts pushed a new printout across the table. Call detail records pulled from carriers, scrubbed and aligned against tower maps. A number the family didn't recognize lit up the page. It wasn't in Natalie's contacts. It didn't carry a name. But from just after dawn until nearly noon on the day she vanished, messages had moved back and forth in a steady stream, over 100 of them. And then, at midday, an abrupt, absolute stop. The room quieted. They had chased obsessions and alibis for 3 long weeks. Now the case pulsed from a single point of light, an unlisted number on the other end of Natalie's screen. Whoever owned it had been the last voice in her day, and whoever owned it had gone dark the moment she did. The stranger behind the screen, the number wasn't in any contact list, not in Natalie's phone, not in her emails, nowhere. But the messages told their own story. Over 100 texts, fast, detailed, emotional, like two people who'd known each other for years, except they hadn't. The first one had come at 5:03 a.m. By 12:17 p.m., the conversation went dead. At 12:32, her phone stopped moving, and by nightfall, Natalie Ballinger was gone. Investigators traced the number to a 22-year-old man named Joseph Lopez, quiet, pale, working nights at a Domino's Pizza outside Denver. No criminal record, no known connection to Natalie. When detectives first called, he sounded nervous but calm. "Sure, I can come in. I don't know her personally, but maybe it's about Craigslist?" Craigslist. The word hit the room like a spark. Agents exchanged glances. Craigslist had been a graveyard of coincidence before. People drawn into things darker than they could imagine. Inside the interrogation room, Lopez sat small in the metal chair, fidgeting with his sleeves. He spoke softly, his eyes fixed on the floor. "I saw an ad that morning," he said. "It just said something strange. Something about putting a hit on herself." The detectives froze. "A hit on herself?" He nodded. "Yeah, like she wanted to, end things. But I thought it was a joke or a cry for help. I've been through depression too, so I reached out." The officers leaned in. "And you met her?" "Yes," he whispered. "I did. I picked her up that morning." For the first time, someone admitted seeing Natalie alive after that last text. The air in the room thickened. He continued, his tone flickering between sadness and fascination. "She was quiet. I asked her what was wrong, but she didn't want to talk. We just drove for a while. She didn't seem scared, just done." When detectives asked where they went, he hesitated. "These side roads, somewhere near the farms." She said she liked how peaceful it looked. A pattern was forming, one that chilled everyone in that room. Lopez said he was a writer, someone who loved dark role play online. He'd even created characters who were killers. "It helps me process things," he said with a faint, uneasy smile. "I never meant to hurt anyone." His eyes flickered with a strange pride when he spoke about his alter ego, Aki, a fictional psychopath hitman he'd invented years before. "He's like a ghost," Lopez said. "Someone who does what people secretly wish for, but can't admit out loud." Detectives exchanged looks. They'd seen this before, fantasy bleeding into reality, guilt hiding behind storytelling. "So, what happened when you parked?" one asked. "She told me she wanted me to do it," Lopez said. "I thought maybe I could talk her out of it, but she had a gun." He swallowed hard, eyes darting to the door. "I told her I didn't have one, and she said, 'It's okay, I brought it.'" The room fell silent. A chill ran through every investigator there. They'd heard enough stories to recognize when a person was circling around the truth, but not touching it. Lopez claimed he left her alive, that he dropped her off near Riverdale Road and drove away. "She just said she wanted to walk for a bit," he added. "That was the last time I saw her. Except, according to phone data, he hadn't gone home." His GPS placed him right at the murder scene, the same place Natalie's body was found, for nearly 8 minutes. When they confronted him with it, Lopez looked stunned, blinking too fast. I don't remember that," he stammered. "I was driving around. Maybe I stopped. I don't know." But detectives did know. Every time he spoke, his story twisted tighter around itself. He said he was there by accident, then said he was lost. Finally, he went silent, staring at the floor, lips pressed shut. In another room, crime scene technicians were unpacking evidence from Lopez's car, fast food wrappers, maps, loose receipts. Then they found it, a pistol, half wrapped in a towel, hidden in the trunk. Ballistics would later confirm it matched the bullet that killed Natalie. The next time detectives entered the room, Lopez looked smaller, shrunken into his hoodie. His first words were barely audible. "She told me to pull over," he said. "She said she didn't want to go home." "What happened next?" He hesitated. "She said she wanted it to look clean, like she wasn't scared. She asked me to help." The room went dead quiet. "She was crying," he whispered. "She said she couldn't do it herself." And then came the line no one in that building would ever forget. "So, I did it for her." He looked up at the detective, hollow, trembling, eyes wet but unfeeling. "She wanted me too," he said. "You don't understand. She wanted it." The confession no one wanted. When detectives replayed the footage of Joseph Lopez's confession later that night, no one spoke for a long time. The sound of his quiet voice saying, "She wanted me to," clung to the walls of the room long after the lights were turned off. It wasn't the kind of confession that brought relief. It brought something colder. For weeks, everyone had been chasing monsters. A stalker with a restraining order, a jealous boyfriend, a stranger with a white truck. But in the end, the monster had been hiding in plain sight. A quiet, awkward man who'd answered a post no one should have written. The investigators had one last thing left to do: find out if Lopez was lying again. They sent the gun to the lab. They pulled every text, every deleted message, every unsent draft from Natalie's phone. What came back didn't make the story cleaner. It made it darker. At 6:25 a.m., on the morning she disappeared, Natalie had posted an ad on Craigslist. The title was only 5 words long, "Thinking about putting a hit on myself." It was flagged and deleted within 2 minutes, but that was enough time for Lopez to see it and reply. Within an hour, they were texting. Within 7, she was dead. Detective Hyde reread those messages late into the night. They weren't what anyone expected. Natalie's words weren't desperate, at least not in the usual sense. They were detached, eerily calm. "How would you do it?" one said. "Would it hurt?" another read. Lopez's replies were colder, rehearsed, methodical, almost cinematic. "It'll be quick," he wrote. "You won't even know." When they compared his language to the online role-plays he'd written under his alias Aki, the similarities were exact. Word for word. Scene for scene. Lopez hadn't just answered her cry for help, he'd performed it. The following morning, detectives secured a warrant for his apartment. Inside, they found stacks of handwritten notes, short stories, character sketches, outlines for a horror novel. Each story ended the same way, with a woman dying and the killer walking away believing he'd done her a kindness. He wasn't a writer looking for release. He was a man building an excuse. In court, months later, Lopez looked just as he had that day in the interrogation room. Small, timid, soft-spoken. But when the prosecutor read his messages aloud, the mask cracked. His story didn't hold anymore. He hadn't been trying to help Natalie. He'd been acting out a fantasy he had already written a dozen times. When the verdict came, guilty of second-degree murder, Lopez only nodded, as though he had expected it. He never apologized. Not to Natalie's family, not to the detectives, not even to himself. At the sentencing, Natalie's sister stood and faced him directly. Her voice didn't shake. "She thought you were listening," she said. "She thought someone finally cared enough to stop her. And you used that to make yourself feel powerful." The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of paper rustling and a camera clicking somewhere in the back. Outside, the winter sky over Colorado was the same flat gray it had been the day Natalie vanished. Reporters called it the Craigslist murder, but the detectives who worked the case never used that name. To them, it was the story of a girl who reached out into the void, and the void answered back. Even after Joseph Lopez was sentenced to 48 years in prison, no one felt closure. Not really, because when the details finally came together, the story wasn't about cruelty or revenge. It was about the internet's quiet, infinite emptiness, the kind that answers when you whisper into it long enough. Years later, locals still avoid Riverdale Road after dark. They say the place feels wrong, not haunted exactly, but watchful, as if T remembers what happened there. As if the headlights that pass through that stretch of road are still being observed by someone unseen. Natalie's photo sits on her sister's desk, framed under glass. She's smiling, wide, alive, unaware of the storm her story would leave behind. And somewhere in a prison library, Joseph Lopez writes again. A new story with a new name for his killer and a new girl who trusts him too much. He still calls it fiction. But everyone who has read his words knows better. If you thought this story was chilling, the next case makes this one look simple. Hit subscribe, because what you're about to hear next might just be the one case no one wants solved.